In August of 1847, a slave woman named Eliza Boone was publicly examined in Savannah, Georgia, not for punishment, but for a mystery no white doctor could explain. She was 22 years old, born enslaved, and her hair had been pure white since the moment she entered this world. Not gray, not faded, white, like winter frost. Plantation records confirmed it. Midwives swore to it. Her mother had screamed that night because the child in her arms looked like a ghost. By October, 7 physicians had examined Eliza. By December, 3 men who touched her scalp were dead. And by the following summer, Eliza herself had vanished, leaving behind blood, ashes, and a journal that terrified every man who read it. The white society of coastal Georgia whispered about curses, African witchcraft, and divine punishment. But they had no idea what Eliza truly was, or what had been done to her before she ever learned to speak. By 1852, the Boone plantation would be erased from maps. No official reason. No court records. Just silence. What really caused Eliza Boone's white hair? Why did science fail so completely? And what did she do, quietly, patiently, that made even slave owners afraid to say her name aloud? Before we uncover the disturbing truth, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your state below. Now let me take you back to where it all began. In September of 1825, the sky above coastal Georgia split open with rain so heavy it flattened the rice fields and turned the narrow plantation paths into rivers of red mud. Thunder rolled low and continuous, like something enormous dragging itself across the heavens. On Boone Plantation, no one slept that night. Ruth Boone screamed as the pain took her. She was 23 years old, enslaved since birth, her body already worn thin by forced labor and 2 previous pregnancies that had ended before the children could breathe. The cabin where she lay stank of sweat, blood, and damp pine boards. Rain leaked through the roof in slow, steady drips. 3 enslaved midwives surrounded her, their faces tight with fear, hands slick and trembling. Push. Again. Ruth did. Her scream tore through the storm and vanished into it. The child came too quickly after that. One last convulsion. One final cry. Then silence. The midwives froze. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hammering the roof and Ruth's ragged breathing as she reached out blindly. Let me see her. No one moved. The oldest midwife, Miriam, stared down at the infant in her hands. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The baby was alive. Its chest rose and fell. Its mouth opened, releasing a thin, sharp cry that did not sound like any newborn's cry Miriam had ever heard. The hair was wrong. It was not light, not pale, not the faint brown of a child yet to darken. It was white, pure, colorless white, like ash, like frost, like bone. Lord preserve us, Miriam whispered. Ruth forced herself up on one elbow. What is it? Her voice cracked. What's wrong with my baby? Miriam did not answer. She turned the child slightly, as if hoping the light from the single candle had deceived her. It had not. The baby's lashes were white. The faint down along its scalp shimmered unnaturally in the candlelight, reflecting it back. Another midwife crossed herself despite knowing better. That ain't natural. Ruth's heart began to pound. Give her to me. Reluctantly, Miriam placed the child into Ruth's arms. Ruth stared. For a heartbeat, she thought she was dying. That this was some fever dream, some last cruel trick of pain before darkness. But the baby was warm, solid, real. Its tiny fingers closed around Ruth's thumb with surprising strength. The child's eyes fluttered open. They were dark, normal, human. Ruth exhaled a sob she had been holding in since the first contraction. She's alive. That's all that matters. That's all. But the midwives did not relax. They had seen stillborn children, deformed limbs, infants marked by illness or injury. They had never seen this. Someone has to tell the house, one of them said quietly. No, Ruth said, clutching the baby tighter. Please, don't. The storm chose that moment to lull, the thunder retreating just long enough for a new sound to carry across the plantation. A lantern flared outside the cabin window. The door opened without a knock. Overseer Caleb Hargrove filled the doorway, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, his eyes already sharp and searching. What's all this noise? No one answered. His gaze dropped to Ruth's arms. He stepped closer, lifting the lantern higher. The light spilled over the infant's head. Hargrove stopped. What in God's name? He leaned closer, slow, deliberate. The baby whimpered. Ruth shrank back, instinctively turning her body to shield the child. Hargrove straightened. His face did not show fear. It showed calculation. "Fetch Mrs. Boone," he said. "Now." Within minutes, the mistress of the plantation stood inside the cabin, skirts held high above the mud, her face pinched with irritation at being disturbed so late. She had expected blood, perhaps death. She had not expected this. She stared at the baby for a long time without speaking. Finally she said, "Is it blind?" "No, ma'am," Miriam answered. "Eyes work just fine." Mrs. Boone nodded once as if that settled something. "Then it lives." Ruth swallowed. "May I name her?" Mrs. Boone's eyes flicked to her. "Oh, praising. You may call her whatever helps you work." She turned back to Hargrove. "Make a note in the ledger. Full detail." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Boone paused at the door. "This child stays. She will be observed." Ruth's stomach dropped. As the mistress left, the rain began again, harder than before. Ruth looked down at her daughter, at the impossible white hair already drying into soft curls against her skull. She pressed her forehead to the child's and whispered a name she did not dare say aloud again. Eliza. What Ruth did not know, what none of them knew, was that this child would be written into records, letters, and sealed files for the next 30 years. That men of science would bleed her, cut her, and fail to understand her. And that Boone plantation would one day be nothing more than scorched earth and rumor. But for now, Eliza Boone slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware that her very existence had already marked her for things far worse than chains. By March of 1826, the rain had gone and the low country turned bright and merciless. The rice canals glittered under sun like blades laid flat across the earth. Spanish moss hung from live oaks and gray ropes, swaying as if the trees themselves were breathing. Boone Plantation looked peaceful from a distance. White columns of the main house, orderly rows of outbuildings, fields stretching outward like a promise. Up close, it smelled of rot and warm mud and bodies worked beyond what bodies were made to give. Eliza Boone was carried into that world like a curiosity wrapped in cloth. Mrs. Boone insisted on seeing her every week at first. Ruth would be ordered to the back steps of the main house, where the cook's smoke drifted and the flies gathered, and she would wait until the mistress descended in her mourning bonnet, perfume battling the scent of the plantation and losing. Uncover her head. Ruth obeyed. Every time, the mistress's eyes narrowed as if the child's white hair offended her personally. She would reach out with gloved fingers, never bare skin, and pinch a lock as though testing the quality of cotton. It has not darkened. No, ma'am. Does the child sicken? No, ma'am. Mrs. Boone's mouth would tighten, not with relief, but with irritation at a mystery refusing to solve itself. Behind her, Caleb Hargrove would stand like a fence post, lantern jaw set, watching Ruth's hands, watching the baby, watching the way other enslaved people looked away as they passed. "They stare at her," Mrs. Boone said once. "Tell them to stop." Ruth lowered her gaze. "Yes, ma'am." But she could not stop it. No one could. In the quarters, the whispers moved faster than the river current. "She's a spirit child. She's marked. She's the devil's joke." Old Miriam told Ruth late at night when the cabin was dark and the air was thick with the smell of boiled corn, "Keep her close. Keep her quiet. Folks fear what they don't understand." Ruth's voice shook. "She's just a baby." Miriam's eyes were weary. A baby can still be a cursed child. Not on her. On everybody around her. Ruth held Eliza tighter, feeling the warm weight, the small heartbeat. "No, not my girl." Eliza grew quickly like a vine finding sun. By age 2 she walked. By age 3 she talked. Her voice came soft but clear, words careful as if she weighed them before letting them go. "Why my hair like cotton?" she asked once, patting her head. Ruth's throat tightened. "Because God made you that way." Eliza frowned. "God make other babies brown." Ruth did not answer. She could not. There were truths on Boone Plantation that got people killed. The first time Eliza stepped outside with her hair uncovered, the other enslaved children stopped playing. They stared. One boy, older, bold, pointed. "Ghost head." Eliza blinked, not understanding the cruelty yet. "My name Eliza." He threw a pebble at her feet. "Ghost." Ruth stormed forward, snatching Eliza up. "Get away from her." The boy's mother dragged him back by the arm, eyes wide with fear. "Don't you touch her," she hissed at him, then looked at Ruth like Ruth carried plague. "Keep her away from mine." Ruth wanted to scream at them. She wanted to beg them to see her child as flesh and breath, not omen. But the plantation had taught them all the same lesson. Danger was contagious. In the main house, the white children stared too, only their stares were hungry. Little Henry Boone, the mistress's youngest, cornered Eliza near the laundry line one afternoon, his freckled face twisted in glee. He reached out, grabbed a fistful of Eliza's hair and yanked. Eliza did not cry. She turned slowly, dark eyes steady on him. Henry hesitated. "What?" he snapped, suddenly uneasy. "Ain't you gonna scream?" Eliza's voice stayed calm. "Let go." Henry scoffed. "Or what?" Eliza's gaze did not waver. "Or you get hurt." Henry laughed loudly, but it sounded forced. He released her hair like it burned his fingers and ran off, calling back over his shoulder, "Weird thing. Freak." Ruth rushed to Eliza, hands fluttering over her scalp. "Baby, you all right?" Eliza nodded once. "He's scared." Ruth swallowed. "You don't talk to white folks like that." Eliza tilted her head. "Why?" "Because," Ruth's voice broke, "because the world was made of rules written in blood. Because even breathing wrong could get you beaten. Because a child's innocence was a liability. Because you don't." That evening, Caleb Hargrove wrote in the plantation ledger with slow, careful strokes. His handwriting was neat, almost elegant, like a preacher's. Eliza, female, Negro, born September 1825, hair white since birth. He paused, ink hanging heavy on the pen tip. Then he added another line, quieter, as if he did not want the paper itself to overhear. "Condition persists. Subject alert. Not prone to crying." Mrs. Boone watched from across the desk, hands folded. "You believe she is sick?" Hargrove's eyes stayed on the page. "I believe she is profitable." Mrs. Boone leaned back slightly. "Profitable how?" Hargrove looked up. "People pay to see oddities. You've read the Charleston papers. Two-headed calves. Bearded women. Men with skin like wax." Mrs. Boone's lips pressed together, considering. "She is not leaving this plantation." "Not yet," Hargrove said. "But she can be used right here. A warning. A lesson. Or," he hesitated, "a question that draws men who think they have answers." Mrs. Boone's eyes narrowed. "Men of science." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Boone stared toward the window where the fields lay darkening under dusk. "Bring a doctor," she said softly. "Not the local kind. Someone educated." Hargrove nodded. "Charleston." Mrs. Boone's voice turned colder. "And keep her mother compliant." Hargrove's mouth curved faintly. "That part is easy." Out in the quarters, Ruth lay awake beside Eliza, listening to frogs in the marsh and the distant creak of trees. Eliza slept with her small hand curled in Ruth's palm. Ruth whispered into the darkness, a prayer that sounded more like a bargain. "Please, just let her live." What Ruth did not know was that the ledger entry had already made Eliza something worse than enslaved. It had made her a subject. And subjects did not get mercy. The man arrived in July of 1837, riding a chestnut horse lathered white with sweat, his boots polished too carefully for plantation work. His name was Edgar Whitcomb, newly appointed overseer, hired after two previous men had been dismissed for reasons Mrs. Boone refused to put into writing. He brought with him a trunk of clothes, a silver pocket watch, and a habit of staring too long at things he did not understand. By then Eliza Boone was nearly 12. Her hair had grown thick and heavy, falling down her back in pale coils that caught sunlight and reflected it sharply, like water under noon glare. Mrs. Boone no longer allowed Ruth to keep it covered. The child's condition had become, in the mistress's mind, a feature rather than a flaw. "Let them see it," she said. "It reminds them they are owned." Whitcomb saw Eliza on his first afternoon. She stood near the well, drawing water with careful hands, her movements economical, her posture upright in a way that unsettled him. Children her age were usually loud, clumsy, eager for attention or terrified of it. Eliza was neither. She moved like someone older, someone watching. Whitcomb slowed his horse. He did not speak at first. He dismounted, boots crunching against gravel, and circled her once as if inspecting a horse for purchase. Eliza kept her eyes on the bucket, pretending he was not there. "Turn around," he said. Eliza did not. Whitcomb smiled thinly. "I said turn around." Ruth appeared at the edge of the clearing, her breath caught high in her chest. "Sir, she's working." Whitcomb glanced at Ruth as if noticing a fly. "I did not address you." His attention returned to Eliza. He reached out and took hold of her hair. The reaction was immediate. Whitcomb sucked in a sharp breath, as though he had touched something scalding. His fingers twitched. His grip tightened, then released. He stared at his own hand, flexing it once, twice. "What is this?" he muttered. Eliza finally looked up at him. Her eyes were calm. Too calm. "Let go," she said quietly. Whitcomb laughed, but it came out wrong. You think you can order me? Eliza tilted her head. You already did. Something flickered across Whitcomb's face. Anger, embarrassment, then something closer to fear. He reached out again, deliberately this time, burying his fingers into her hair, pressing down to the scalp as if trying to prove something to himself. The world seemed to tilt. Whitcomb's knees buckled slightly. He staggered back a step, hand flying to his temple. His vision swam. The air around him felt suddenly too thick to breathe. Sir? Ruth whispered. Whitcomb waved her away, jaw clenched. Get her out of my sight. That night, Whitcomb did not eat. By midnight, he was sweating through his sheets, his body shaking as though gripped by ague. He dreamed of fire blooming under his skin, of white light crawling through his veins like insects. He screamed once, loud enough to wake the house. By dawn, he was dead. The doctor called it a fever. Malaria most likely. The swamp air was bad that season. Mrs. Boone accepted the explanation publicly. Privately, she ordered Eliza brought to the parlor. Eliza stood on the rug, hands folded in front of her, hair loose around her shoulders. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, making her head glow unnaturally bright. Mrs. Boone watched her for a long moment. Did you touch him? Eliza answered carefully. He touched me. Mrs. Boone's lips tightened. You are not to speak unless spoken to. Eliza lowered her gaze. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Boone circled her slowly, skirts whispering. Did you do anything strange? Eliza considered the question. No, ma'am. The answer was true. And it was not. Mrs. Boone stopped behind her. You are an inconvenience, she said softly. And inconveniences must justify themselves. She leaned closer. Do you understand me? Eliza nodded once. Outside, the quarters buzzed with rumor. Some said Whitcomb's heart had burst. Others swore they heard him calling Eliza's name in the night, begging her to stop. Old Miriam came to Ruth that evening, face pale. You got to hide her. Ruth's hands shook as she folded laundry. Where? How? Miriam shook her head. I don't know. But men don't die like that for nothing. Eliza sat nearby, listening, eyes lowered. She said nothing. Later, when Ruth lay awake staring at the ceiling, Eliza whispered into the dark, Mama? Yes, baby. Why he fall? Ruth swallowed. Sometimes men get sick. Eliza was quiet for a long time. Then, he was afraid. Ruth turned to her. What makes you say that? Eliza's voice stayed even. His hands were shaking. Ruth pulled her close. You don't think on it. You hear me? Eliza nodded against her shoulder. But in the weeks that followed, Eliza did think on it. She thought on the way Whitcomb's face had changed. On the heat that had bloomed under her scalp where he touched her. On the strange certainty that had filled her chest. Not fear, but recognition. Something had passed between them in that moment. Something invisible and irreversible. What Eliza did not yet understand was what it meant. But she had learned her first true lesson on Boone Plantation. Men who touched her did not always survive. And once that truth settled into her bones, Eliza Boone began to watch the world with new, dangerous patience. After Whitcomb's burial, Boone Plantation entered a season of careful silence. No one spoke his name aloud. Mrs. Boone referred to him only as the former overseer, as if language itself might summon consequences. Another man was hired within a month, younger and quieter, one who kept his distance from the enslaved and drank himself into sleep each night. He never touched Eliza. That was not mercy. It was caution. By then, Eliza Boone had learned how to disappear in plain sight. She was assigned to the main house as a seamstress's helper, her small hands nimble, her posture composed. The work suited her. It placed her indoors, away from the fields, close to rooms where voices carried and doors were left ajar when white people assumed no one worth noticing was near. Mrs. Boone watched her closely at first. She listens, the mistress said once. Make sure she listens only when told. Yes, ma'am, the seamstress replied, though they both knew listening was not something that could be switched off. Eliza learned patterns. She learned that lessons were held in the morning for the Boone children, that slates were left stacked by the window afterward, chalk smudges ghosting the surface. She learned that books were kept on a shelf in the parlor, some decorative, some read often enough to soften their spines. She learned that no one noticed her when she moved quietly. At first she only watched. She watched letters form under the tutor's hand. She watched sounds turn into meaning. It took longer for the words to settle, but once they did, they stayed. Eliza's memory was a thing that held fast. Nothing slipped free once it lodged there. One afternoon she lingered too long. The tutor paused mid-sentence and looked at her. You there? Eliza froze. Come closer. Her heart began to pound as she stepped forward. What do you know? He asked. She weighed the question. Enough to mind my work. He studied her hair, the way the light bent around it. Read this. He handed her a primer, open to a simple passage. Eliza's eyes moved over the page. Her lips parted. She read. The tutor's brows rose. How long? Eliza answered honestly. I do not know. He closed the book slowly. Do not let your mistress hear of this. Eliza nodded. That night she stole her first book. It was small, leather-bound, hidden behind larger volumes no one touched. She took it apart in her mind page by page, returning it before dawn. She did this again and again with different books, until the words began to assemble themselves into something larger than stories. There were medical texts, crude by later standards but precise enough to open doors. Diagrams of skulls and veins. Discussions of humors and blood, of conditions that ran in families, of traits passed from parent to child like curses. There were notes on albinism, written hesitantly, full of uncertainty. Eliza read them all. She began to understand that men used words when they did not understand a thing, piling theory atop ignorance and calling it knowledge. She also began to understand that her body was not an accident. Her mother's body had not been either. Ruth grew thinner that year. Her cough worsened. She worked through it because not working was worse. Eliza watched her carefully, the way she had learned to watch everything. One evening, as Ruth lay coughing into a rag dark with blood, Eliza asked, Mama, what did they do to you? Ruth closed her eyes. Nothing. Eliza waited. Ruth's breath rattled. Don't ask me things you don't need to know. Eliza's voice softened. I need to know. Ruth turned her face to the wall. They brought men. Doctors. Said they were studying women. Said it would help others. Said I should be proud. Eliza's fingers tightened. Studying how? Ruth did not answer for a long time. When she did, her voice was barely there. They put things in me. Took things out. Asked questions. Wrote notes. Eliza felt something settle inside her. Heavy. Cold. Did it hurt? Ruth laughed once, bitter and brief. Pain was the point. Ruth died before winter. The plantation marked it as consumption. Another body returned to the earth without ceremony. Eliza stood at the edge of the burial ground, hair uncovered, face empty. She did not cry. What she felt instead was focus. She began keeping her own records, at first in her head, then on scraps of paper stolen from the sewing room, then in a small journal she hid beneath a loose floorboard in the attic crawlspace. She wrote at night by candlelight, her handwriting careful, precise. Names, dates, symptoms, pregnancies that ended too soon, children born sick or strange or not at all, men who visited certain cabins and not others, doctors who returned year after year with new instruments and old excuses. She noticed patterns. She noticed that women who were taken to the main house more often grew sicker faster. She noticed that certain men avoided touching her now, crossing themselves subtly when they passed. She noticed something else too. Her own body was changing. Her hair fell out in small clumps some nights, only to grow back thicker, brighter. Her skin burned sometimes beneath the scalp, a deep heat that came and went without warning. She tested herself quietly, fasting, changing her diet, mimicking things she had read. The results were always the same. She endured more than she should have. By the time she turned 15, Eliza Boone understood something no one had ever intended her to understand. She was not the beginning of the experiment. She was the result. And what they had made of her was not fragile. It was waiting. Dr. Nathaniel Harrow arrived at Boone Plantation in April of 1840, carrying 2 valises, a letter of introduction sealed in Charleston wax, and a reputation that had followed him south like a warning. He was not young, but he was not yet old either, 38, sharp-eyed, his hair already thinning at the temples. He wore his abolitionist sympathies carefully, like a hidden blade, and spoke with the clipped precision of a man used to being overheard. Mrs. Boone received him in the parlor with practiced courtesy. You understand, she said, folding her hands, that what you see here does not leave this property. Harrow inclined his head. I understand discretion, madam. I also understand disease. Mrs. Boone smiled thinly. This is not a disease. So I have been told. Eliza stood near the wall, silent, her hair pinned back tightly for the first time in years. Mrs. Boone had ordered it so. The effect was worse. The tension made the white gleam sharper, more deliberate, as if her body resisted concealment. Harrow noticed immediately. He did not stare. He did not reach out. He acknowledged her with the same measured attention he gave the room, the furniture, the light. That alone unsettled Mrs. Boone. "You may examine her," the mistress said. Briefly. Harrow stepped closer. "Your name?" "Eliza Boone." He nodded once. "May I?" Eliza met his gaze. Something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or caution. She extended her hand. He took her pulse. His fingers were cool, steady. "Do you feel pain often?" he asked. "Yes," Eliza answered. "But not like others." Harrow's eyes flicked up. "Explain." Eliza searched for words that would not betray her too much. "It comes and goes. Like heat." Harrow released her wrist slowly. "And when touched?" Eliza did not answer at once. Mrs. Boone cleared her throat. "Doctor." Harrow did not look away from Eliza. "It matters." Eliza spoke. "Some men get sick." Silence stretched. Mrs. Boone's smile vanished. "That is enough." But Harrow had already heard it. He turned to Mrs. Boone. "How many examinations has she undergone?" Mrs. Boone's jaw tightened. "Enough." "How many died afterward?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Boone stood. "You will confine yourself to observation." Harrow bowed slightly. "As you wish." He did not leave. Over the following weeks, Harrow lingered. He watched Eliza work. He asked her questions that were careful, indirect. He requested records. Mrs. Boone gave him edited versions. He noticed what was missing. One evening, as dusk bled into the marsh and cicadas screamed, Harrow found Eliza in the sewing room, alone. "You read," he said quietly. Eliza did not deny it. "Yes." "Medical texts?" "Yes." Harrow exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath he had held for years. "Good." She studied him. "You are not afraid." "I am," he said. "But fear is not the same as ignorance." He handed her a folded letter. "I have written to colleagues in Boston. They believe this condition may be induced. Artificial. A result of repeated interference with maternal health." Eliza's fingers tightened on the paper. "They did it to my mother." Harrow's mouth set. "Yes." Mrs. Boone's voice cut through the moment from the doorway. "Doctor." Harrow turned. "Madam." "I am paying you to solve a puzzle," she said coldly. "Not to sympathize with it." Harrow met her gaze evenly. "Understanding is not sympathy." That night, Harrow wrote in his own journal by lamplight, his pen moving quickly. Subject exhibits unusual neurological response. Possible bioelectric sensitivity. Pain tolerance abnormally high. Reaction in others, psychosomatic or something more. He paused, then added a line he would later regret writing at all. "If induced, this condition is not stable. It is evolving." 3 days later, Mrs. Boone ordered Eliza brought to the examination room. The instruments were laid out neatly. Scalpel. Glass vials. Needles. Harrow stood rigid, hands clenched behind his back. "This is unnecessary," he said. Mrs. Boone adjusted her gloves. "You will assist." Eliza climbed onto the table without being told. She lay still, eyes on the ceiling, breath even. Harrow leaned close to her ear. "If you want me to stop this, say so." Eliza whispered back, "Do not." His breath caught. "Why?" "Because they will not stop anyway," she said. "But you need to see." The blade bit into her scalp. Blood welled. Eliza did not cry out. Harrow watched the incision, the color, the response. He felt sick. He felt something else too, certainty. This was not an anomaly. This was design. Afterward, as Eliza sat alone in the dark, hair loose again, she pressed a cloth to her wound and waited for the heat to bloom. It did. Down the hall, Mrs. Boone collapsed suddenly, clutching her chest, breath tearing out of her in panicked gasps. Harrow rushed to her side. "What is happening?" she rasped. Harrow did not answer. He was watching Eliza's door. And for the first time since arriving at Boone Plantation, he understood that whatever Eliza Boone was becoming, it was already beyond his ability to contain. What he did not yet know was that she had never needed him to save her. She needed him to witness. And witnesses, once they understood the truth, rarely survived unchanged. Eliza began the journal the same night Mrs. Boone recovered. She waited until the house settled into its false quiet, until the lamps dimmed behind closed doors, until the boards ceased their complaining, until the insects reclaimed the dark. Then she climbed into the narrow attic crawlspace above the sewing room, carrying a stub of candle and a stack of stolen paper folded so many times the creases felt like scars. She wrote slowly at first. Not because she lacked words, but because she understood what words could do. April 14, 1840. Scalp incision. Blood darker than expected. Pain delayed, not absent. Heat followed. Mistress collapsed within the hour. Cause unknown. She paused, listening. Nothing but frogs and the distant slap of water against the rice gates. She kept writing. Names came easily now. Dates too. She wrote of women taken from the quarters at night, returned pale and shaking by morning. She wrote of pregnancies counted and lost, of babies born weak, strange, or dead. She wrote of the men who asked questions without listening to answers, who called suffering a variable and cruelty a method. She wrote of her mother, Ruth Boone, subject for repeated trials, injections, bleeding, forced pairings, promises made and broken, body failed, died coughing blood. Eliza's hand did not shake. She had learned to set feeling aside until it was useful. By candlelight, she copied passages from medical texts she had memorized. She translated them into her own language, stripped of theory and pretense. Cause, effect, pattern. She noticed something the doctors had missed or refused to see. The experiments had not been random. The women chosen shared traits: strength, endurance, resistance to illness. Those who survived the longest produced children who survived longer still. Eliza was not an outlier. She was a culmination. She tested herself quietly. She fasted for days, then worked until her muscles trembled. She ate certain plants the older women whispered about and ignored others entirely. She pressed her fingers to her own scalp, waiting for the familiar heat. Sometimes it came. Sometimes it did not. When it did, she recorded who fell ill afterward. The list grew. Dr. Harrow began to notice the changes before anyone else did. "You are thinner," he said one afternoon, voice low as he handed her a bundle of cloth. "But stronger." Eliza did not look up. Strength is not always visible. Harrow hesitated. "You should stop what you are doing." She met his eyes. "You do not know what I am doing." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "You did know. Or enough." That night, Mrs. Boone ordered more tests. They strapped Eliza to the table this time. Not tightly. Just enough to remind her of the hierarchy. Harrow protested. The mistress silenced him with a look. "We will not break her," Mrs. Boone said. "We will understand her." The needle slid into Eliza's arm. She watched the vial fill, dark and steady. She felt the heat begin, low and slow, like embers under ash. She smiled. 2 days later, the new overseer fell ill. By the 3rd day he could not stand. By the 4th he was dead. The plantation whispered again. Mrs. Boone called Harrow into the parlor, her face pale beneath powder. "This is coincidence." Harrow did not answer immediately. He was remembering his own symptoms: headaches, dizziness, the strange sensation of pressure behind his eyes whenever he spent too long near Eliza. "No," he said finally. "It is not." Mrs. Boone's voice hardened. "Then fix it." Harrow shook his head. "You cannot undo what was done." Her hand trembled on the arm of her chair. "Then control it." Eliza heard all of this from the hallway. That evening, Harrow found her in the sewing room again. He closed the door behind him. "They will escalate," he said. "They believe pressure produces truth." Eliza folded fabric with precise movements. "Pressure reveals what is already there." Harrow lowered his voice. "If they kill you?" "They will not," Eliza said. He stared at her. "How can you be so certain?" She looked at him, then really looked, and for a moment he saw something in her expression that made his breath hitch. Not arrogance. Not cruelty. Resolve. "They need me," she said. "And I am patient." He swallowed. "I can help you leave." Eliza shook her head. "Not yet." "Why?" She thought of the journal hidden beneath the floorboards. Of the names written there. Of the pattern nearing completion. "Because leaving now would mean nothing changes." Harrow ran a hand through his thinning hair. "You are talking about vengeance." Eliza returned to her sewing. "I am talking about balance." That night, as she climbed back into the crawlspace, Eliza added another page to the journal. They believe they are in control. This belief makes them careless. Carelessness is a gift. She blew out the candle and lay in the dark, listening to the house breathe around her. Somewhere below, Mrs. Boone paced, her steps uneven. Years later, when fragments of the journal would be rumored to surface, copied, translated, dismissed as fabrication, historians would argue about its purpose. Some would call it evidence. Others would call it madness. None of them would understand the simplest truth written between its lines. Eliza Boone was not recording the past. She was preparing the future. And the future was closer than anyone in that house dared to imagine. By the end of 1841, patience had rotted into suspicion. Mrs. Boone no longer pretended this was about knowledge. The questions had grown sharper. The examinations longer. The margins for restraint thinner with each unexplained illness, each sudden death that followed too close on Eliza's presence to be dismissed as chance. Control had slipped. And Mrs. Boone felt it. "You are withholding," the mistress said one morning, standing over Eliza as she scrubbed blood from linen sheets. "You hear everything. You see everything. And yet you tell us nothing useful." Eliza did not look up. "I answer what I am asked." Mrs. Boone's mouth tightened. "Then we will ask better questions." The new examination room was no longer the parlor. It was the old storage building behind the main house, thick-walled, windowless, its door reinforced with iron bands. The table inside had been bolted to the floor. Leather straps lay coiled like resting snakes. Dr. Harrow stood rigid near the wall as Eliza was brought in. "This is not medicine," he said. Mrs. Boone adjusted her gloves. "This is necessity." The first cut was shallow. Testing. Eliza's breath caught for half a second, then steadied. The heat came late as it often did now, creeping rather than flaring. Mrs. Boone frowned. "Again." Harrow stepped forward. "You are exceeding." "Hold her," Mrs. Boone snapped. Two men did. Eliza did not resist. She watched the ceiling beam above her, noting the split in the wood, the way the light from the single lamp made it look like a crack in the sky. The blade went deeper. Blood flowed warm down her temple into her hair. Someone cursed softly. Eliza's jaw tightened, but no sound escaped her. "Pain response?" Mrs. Boone asked. Harrow's voice was hoarse. "Delayed. Diminished." Mrs. Boone's eyes shone with something close to triumph. "Then we proceed." They did. Again and again. Needles. Pressure. Heat. Cold. Eliza's body reacted, but never in the ways expected. She endured. She catalogued. By the end, Harrow's hands shook. "Stop," he said. "You will kill her." Mrs. Boone leaned close to Eliza's face. "You hear that? Even your protector believes you fragile." Eliza turned her head slightly, blood matting her hair. "He believes you are afraid." The room went still. Mrs. Boone slapped her. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Eliza's head snapped to the side. For a brief moment, the heat surged, not from pain but from something older and sharper. Harrow felt it. His stomach lurched. The lamp flickered. Mrs. Boone staggered back, hand pressed to her chest, breath coming shallow and fast. "Enough," she said, though the word sounded more like a plea than an order. They unstrapped Eliza and left her on the table. That night, Mrs. Boone did not sleep. She paced the house, fingers numb, heart racing for no reason she could name. By dawn, she was feverish. By noon, she was confined to bed. Harrow visited Eliza in the infirmary where they had deposited her, as if ashamed to return her to the quarters. "You should have fought," he whispered. Eliza stared at the ceiling. "Why?" "To stop them. They would have done worse," she said. "Now they think they are close." Harrow closed his eyes. Close to what? Eliza turned her head, meeting his gaze. To the wrong conclusion. From that day on, Eliza changed her approach. She allowed mistakes. She let answers come slowly. She winced when expected. She cried out once, just once, when the blade cut. It earned her a nod of satisfaction from Mrs. Boone, a loosening of restraints. Compliance, Eliza learned, was the most convincing disguise. The overseers grew careless again. One brushed her shoulder in passing. Another laughed too loudly in her presence. The cook joked about her hair one afternoon, tugging a strand. 3 days later, the cook collapsed in the yard, foam on his lips, eyes wide and unseeing. Apoplexy, the doctor declared. Eliza wrote it down. Mrs. Boone ordered more tests. Harrow refused. He was beaten for it. Nothing that left marks visible to guests, but enough to make the message clear. After that, he limited himself to watching. Eliza watched too. She noticed the guards changed shifts at midnight. She noticed which doors creaked and which hinges had been recently oiled. She noticed how often Mrs. Boone took laudanum now, how it dulled her reactions. She noticed the drought settling in, the fields cracking, the air turning sharp and restless. Fires broke out more easily that summer. Anger did too. One evening, as Eliza returned to the quarters under guard, she whispered to Miriam, "When the fields burn, run toward the swamp." Miriam stared at her. "What fields?" Eliza did not answer. That night, she added another line to the journal. "Cruelty accelerates decay. They are rushing now. Rushing men make errors." She paused, then wrote one more sentence, pressing hard enough to tear the paper slightly. "I will let them believe they have won. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but approaching. And somewhere deep in the foundations of Boone Plantation, the balance Eliza had spoken of began at last to shift. The drought broke in August of 1842, but it brought no relief. The rain came wrong, short, violent bursts that soaked the topsoil and left the roots dry. The rice fields cracked open like old scars, their irrigation gates clogged with silt and rot. The air grew heavy and irritable. Even the insects sounded angry. Boone Plantation felt like something waiting to ignite. Mrs. Boone ordered longer hours. She blamed the heat for her nerves, the deaths for bad luck, the tension for disobedience. Whippings increased. Food rations shrank. The quarters grew quiet in a way that frightened even the overseers. Silence, Eliza knew, meant people were thinking. She moved through the days with her head bowed, her steps measured. She stitched, cleaned, carried water. She said yes, ma'am, and no, sir, with practiced emptiness. She allowed herself to look small. At night, she did not sleep. She walked the plantation in her mind, counting steps, tracing paths, marking shadows. She knew where the well water tasted different. She knew which barrels held lime and which held grain. She knew which men drank too much and which women were trusted with keys. She chose the night carefully. It was thick with heat, the kind that made breath feel borrowed. Clouds smothered the moon. The guards moved slowly, bored, their lanterns dimmed to save oil. Eliza waited until midnight. She slipped from the quarters without sound, barefoot on packed earth, her white hair bound tightly beneath a dark scarf. She carried a small bundle, powdered plants, ash, oil stolen from the storage shed. Nothing remarkable on its own. Together, something else entirely. She went first to the well near the fields. She worked quickly, hands steady, lowering the mixture into the water and stirring until it disappeared. She did not linger. Poison was patient. It did not need ceremony. From there she moved to the rice storehouse. The door creaked as she opened it. She froze, heart hammering. Nothing stirred. She slipped inside, the smell of grain thick and suffocating. She soaked a rag in oil, wedged it beneath a stack of drying reeds, and lit it with a spark struck soft and low. The fire caught reluctantly at first. Then it breathed. Eliza closed the door gently and walked away. The first scream came from the fields. A guard stumbled from the darkness, coughing, eyes wild. Fire. Flames leapt skyward, devouring dry reeds, racing along irrigation channels like living things. The wind shifted, sudden and cruel, pushing the blaze outward. Panic spread faster than the fire. Men ran. Horses screamed. Bells rang uselessly as smoke swallowed the night. Someone fell into the burning water and did not come back out. Eliza stood at the edge of the chaos, watching. She waited. When the well began to do its work, it was subtle. A man doubled over, retching. Another dropped his bucket and clawed at his throat. By the time anyone understood the water itself was betraying them, it was too late. Mrs. Boone was dragged from the house in her nightclothes, hair loose, eyes wide. "Find her," she shrieked. "Find that girl." Eliza was already gone. She moved toward the main house as the fields burned, slipping through smoke and confusion like a thought no one could catch. She knew the door would be locked. She knew the mistress would think herself safe inside. She also knew about the window in the west wing, the one that never latched properly. Dr. Harrow was waiting there, breathless, face streaked with ash. "You did this." "Yes." "This is madness." "No," Eliza said softly. "This is accounting." They did not have long. The house groaned as embers landed on the roof. Shouts grew closer. Eliza handed Harrow the journal wrapped in cloth. "You take this," she said. "If they catch me." Harrow shook his head. "I am not leaving you." She met his gaze, calm even now. "You are leaving because someone has to tell the truth." A crash sounded below. The front door gave way. Eliza turned toward the stairs. "When you hear screaming," she said, "run." He grabbed her arm. "Eliza." She freed herself easily. "Go." He hesitated one last time, then disappeared into the smoke. Eliza descended into the heart of the house. Mrs. Boone stood in the parlor, clutching a pistol with shaking hands, her face streaked with sweat and powder. The firelight made Eliza's hair glow, unbound now, radiant and terrible. "You," Mrs. Boone whispered. Eliza stopped a few feet away. "Me." Mrs. Boone raised the pistol. Her hand trembled too much to aim. "I made you." Eliza's voice did not rise. "You broke my mother." The mistress screamed and fired. The shot went wide. Eliza stepped forward. What followed was not quick. It was not merciful. It was necessary. By the time the roof collapsed inward and the fire claimed the rest, Boone Plantation was already dead. Eliza walked out through the smoke as dawn bled gray into the sky, her bare feet blackened, her hair loose and shining. Behind her, the fields burned down to ash. Ahead of her lay the swamp. And somewhere in the distance, the world that had made her began, finally, to pay its debt. Eliza did not run to the swamp immediately. That was what they would expect. That was what every story about escape taught the hunters to anticipate. Footprints pointing toward the marsh, a broken branch trail, desperate movement through reeds. Eliza had never been desperate. She had been deliberate. She moved instead through the collapsing edges of the main house, where smoke pressed low and the heat breathed like a living mouth. The Boone family portraits on the walls had already begun to blister, faces warping under flame until the painted eyes looked like they were melting shut. Downstairs, men shouted orders that contradicted each other. Buckets of water sloshed uselessly. The poisoned well had turned every attempt at control into confusion. Bodies lay in awkward shapes where they had fallen, some coughing, some still. In the parlor, Mrs. Boone stood alone now. The pistol in her hand was empty. The scream she had thrown into the room had been swallowed by smoke. Her eyes followed Eliza's approach like trapped animal eyes, wide, wet, and furious. "You cannot do this," she rasped, voice raw. "You are property." Eliza stepped closer, slow enough for the mistress to understand that speed was not needed. "Property does not read," Eliza said. "Property does not keep records." Mrs. Boone's nostrils flared. "You think you are clever? You think you are something new?" Eliza's expression remained calm. "I am what you made. What you tried to perfect." The fire cracked loudly above them. A glowing ember drifted down and landed on the carpet, burning a small hole that widened instantly. Mrs. Boone's eyes flicked to it and back. "You will die out there," she hissed. "In the swamp. The dogs will find you." Eliza leaned in just enough for the mistress to smell smoke and blood in her hair. "Then you will never know what I am. You will die with questions." Mrs. Boone's breath hitched. "Tell me." Eliza held her gaze. No. It was the first time Eliza had ever denied her directly. Mrs. Boone lunged, hands out, nails clawing. She was not trying to kill Eliza. She was trying to grab her hair again to prove possession with touch. Her fingers caught a white lock yanked hard. For a heartbeat, Eliza's scalp burned like lightning. Mrs. Boone's body reacted instantly. She froze mid-motion, her face contorting as if struck from inside. She released Eliza's hair and staggered back, one hand flying to her throat. Eliza watched her with a kind of distant focus, as if observing a predictable reaction in a controlled experiment. Mrs. Boone gasped. "What are you?" Eliza's voice was quiet. "The answer to your cruelty." A heavy crash sounded from the hallway, men coming closer, their boots pounding, their voices rising. "Mrs. Boone." Eliza did not turn. "They are coming," she said. Mrs. Boone's eyes filled with sudden terror. "Help me." Eliza tilted her head slightly. "Help?" Mrs. Boone's lips trembled. "Please." The word looked wrong on her mouth, like a mask worn too late. Eliza stepped back, creating distance. "My mother begged too," she said. "Did you hear her?" Mrs. Boone's mouth opened, but no lie came fast enough. The door burst open and Caleb Hargrove rushed in, his face slick with sweat, eyes scanning the room. Behind him, two men dragged a coughing servant. Hargrove stopped when he saw Eliza. For a brief moment, something passed across his face. Recognition, fear, and something like hatred that had been waiting for years. "There you are," he said, voice low and shaking with restrained violence. "I knew it was you." Eliza met his gaze. "You wrote my name in ink." Hargrove's hand went to the whip at his belt. "And I can erase it." Mrs. Boone clutched her chest, collapsing into a chair. "Caleb," she wheezed, "kill her." Hargrove took a step toward Eliza. Eliza did not retreat. She reached into her dress and pulled out a folded stack of paper, charred at the edges but intact. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" Eliza's voice remained steady. "Names?" Hargrove's mouth tightened. "You lie." Eliza unfolded the pages slowly, letting him see the handwriting. Ruth's name, women's names, dates, notes, and beneath them the names of white men, owners, overseers, visiting doctors. Hargrove's face changed. "Where did you get?" "From watching you," Eliza said. "From listening. From surviving." Hargrove's jaw clenched so hard his cheek muscles jumped. "Give it to me." Eliza shook her head. "It is already gone." Hargrove lunged. Eliza moved faster than expected. Not with wildness, with precision. She stepped into him, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. The whip fell. He gasped, stumbling, trying to yank free. Eliza's other hand flashed with something small and sharp. The knife buried itself into the soft space beneath his jaw before he could speak again. Blood sprayed hot, dark, immediate. Hargrove's eyes went wide, then unfocused. His knees buckled. He collapsed, twitching once as the life left him. The men behind him froze in shock. Mrs. Boone screamed. Eliza stood over Hargrove's body, breathing evenly, hair falling loose like spilled snow. "There is no mercy," she said softly, almost to herself. "Not for you. Not ever." Outside, the house groaned again, flames chewing through beams, smoke thickening. Eliza looked toward the doorway, toward freedom, toward the swamp waiting like an open mouth. None of them knew what she would do next, but they would learn soon enough. And by the time the sun rose fully, Boone Plantation would be nothing but ash, its secrets scattered into the world like embers that refused to die. By sunrise, Boone Plantation was unrecognizable. The main house had collapsed inward, its white columns cracked and blackened, its roof reduced to a smoking skeleton. The rice fields beyond were a wide, steaming scar, charred reeds, boiled mud, ash drifting on the damp morning air like gray snow. The smell was thick, wet smoke, burned wood, and something coppery that clung to the back of the throat. Men arrived from neighboring properties with rifles and dogs. They came because fire did not stay polite in the low country, and because rumors traveled faster than horses. An uprising, a massacre, a curse. By the time the first group reached the plantation gate, the story had already become something monstrous. What happened here? No one answered cleanly. No one could. The survivors, those who had not drunk from the well, those who had not fallen in the smoke, stumbled through the ruins in shock, faces smeared with ash, eyes darting as if expecting the dead to rise. Mrs. Boone was found alive barely. They pulled her from the edge of the collapsed parlor, coughing, hair singed, eyes wild. She clawed at the men who tried to help her, screaming that Eliza was still out there. "Find her. Find that white-headed devil." Her voice broke into sobs that did not sound human. Her hands shook uncontrollably. The men exchanged uneasy looks. They did not laugh at her hysteria. Not after seeing Hargrove's body. Caleb Hargrove lay near the parlor doorway where he had fallen, throat cut clean, blood dried black on his shirt. Even in death, his expression held a kind of disbelief. "Who did this?" one man muttered, though he already knew. Mrs. Boone lifted her head. Her eyes fixed on the question like an accusation. "Her," she rasped. "Eliza. She did all of it." The men shifted, uneasy. The name carried weight now. It had always carried weight, even when spoken only in whispers. Dr. Harrow was gone. His room in the guest wing had been emptied hastily. The bed sheets were torn, the window open, the mud beneath it disturbed by hurried footprints leading toward the swamp. Someone found a discarded shoe half buried near the tree-line, expensive leather, northern make. "He fled," one man said. Mrs. Boone coughed hard, spitting blood into her palm. "He had no choice," she whispered. "None of us did." They searched for Eliza Boone as if searching for an animal. Dogs were brought in, lean, hungry hounds trained to follow the scent of fear. Riders swept the edges of the marsh, shouting into reeds, firing at shadows. Men waded knee-deep into black water that smelled of decay, their rifles held high, their faces tight with dread. But there was no clear trail. No footprints. No torn cloth. No broken branches leading to safety or doom. It was as if Eliza had stepped off the earth. The dogs whined, pulling against their handlers, circling the same patch of ground again and again near the old west wing window. Then one by one they went silent. A handler cursed, yanking at a leash. What's wrong with them? The hounds refused to move forward. They trembled. Some lay down. One began to howl, long and low, as if mourning something unseen. The men looked at each other. They did not say the word curse, but they thought it. They searched the swamp for days anyway. By the third day, 2 men were dead. One found face down in shallow water, eyes open, no wounds visible. Another collapsed on the path back to the plantation, froth at his lips, hands clenched so tight his fingernails tore into his palms. The doctor from the nearest town blamed heat stroke and swamp fever. No one believed him. On the 5th day, a patrol found a scrap of cloth caught on a cypress knee, a piece of dark scarf, torn and wet. "It's hers," someone said. Mrs. Boone clutched it when they brought it back as if holding proof could bring back control. She pressed it to her face and shook with a strange mix of relief and terror. "She's dead," she whispered. "She has to be." But there was no body. No blood trail. No bones. No hair. Only absence. In Savannah, The official report was written carefully, politely, with language designed to suffocate truth. An unfortunate fire. A disturbance among the enslaved. Loss of property and life due to natural causes. Eliza Boone's name did not appear in the public record at all. Privately, letters were exchanged between plantation owners, sealed with trembling hands. Mrs. Boone's friends were advised not to visit. Her husband, away on business when the fire occurred, returned to find a ruin and a wife who stared too long at shadows. He asked the simplest question. "Where is the girl?" Mrs. Boone looked at him, eyes hollow. "Gone," she said. And she took the truth with her. What none of them understood, what they would only piece together years later, was that Eliza Boone had not vanished without leaving anything behind. She had vanished after placing her evidence into the hands of the only man left who might carry it beyond the swamp. And Dr. Nathaniel Harrow, running through reeds with smoke still in his lungs, already knew something else too. This was not an ending. It was the moment the story finally escaped the plantation. In the years after Boone Plantation burned, the Low Country learned how to forget in public and remember in private. By 1845, the land where the main house had stood was overgrown with scrub and thorn. No one rebuilt. Travelers were warned away with vague explanations. Bad soil, sickness, bad memories. Maps marked the place and then in later printings quietly did not. The swamp crept inward, reclaiming what fire had spared. Mrs. Boone survived the winter. She did not recover. Her hands shook constantly. She slept in short, broken stretches and woke screaming from dreams she refused to describe. When visitors came, and they came less often now, she insisted the windows remain shuttered even in daylight. "She watches," Mrs. Boone told her sister once, voice flat. "From the water." Her sister tried to laugh it off. "Who does?" Mrs. Boone stared at her as if she were slow. "You know." By 1848, Mrs. Boone was dead. Official cause, apoplexy. The servants said her heart had simply given up. The priest who buried her noticed her coffin was nailed shut more tightly than custom required. Not everyone forgot Eliza Boone. In the quarters on nearby plantations, stories began to circulate, quiet at first, then persistent. A white-haired woman seen moving through the marsh at dawn. A figure standing knee-deep in water, untouched by insects. A voice calling names that only the dead should remember. Midwives spoke of strange births. "A baby girl," one whispered to another over a wash basin. "Dark skin. White hair. Born where?" "Near the river." Doctors dismissed the reports. Coincidence. Folklore. Poor women misunderstanding nature. But the reports continued. By 1853, a medical journal in Philadelphia published a short, cautious entry titled Observations on Rare Congenital Pigmentation Disorders. Buried halfway through was a reference to something called the Boone anomaly, a condition observed in multiple unrelated births along the Georgia coast, characterized by albinistic hair without corresponding ocular degeneration. The paper ended abruptly. No conclusions. No authorship beyond initials. The follow-up never came. Dr. Nathaniel Harrow did not publish his findings. He fled north, changed his practice, and lived quietly, treating dockworkers and factory women no one else wanted as patients. He married late. He drank more than was wise. He kept a trunk in the corner of his study that he never opened in front of anyone. Inside it, wrapped in oilcloth and shame, was Eliza Boone's journal. He read it again and again over the years, each time understanding something new. The handwriting never wavered. The logic never slipped. It was not the work of madness. It was the work of a mind forced to become precise in order to survive. One entry haunted him most. "They will try to recreate this. They will fail. The cruelty is not repeatable without consequence." Harrow burned the journal in 1861 on the eve of the war. Page by page. He watched the ink curl and vanish, the names erased in smoke. He told himself it was mercy. He was wrong. After the war, after emancipation, after the old order fractured, the stories did not fade. They changed shape. Friedman spoke of a woman who guided runaways through swamps they should not have survived. Of patrols that fell ill after entering certain waters. Of plantation owners who lost entire families to sudden, unexplained sickness. No one ever caught her. By the 1870s, children dared each other to visit the burned land at night. They claimed the air felt wrong there, heavy and electric. Some swore their hair stood on end. Others said they heard breathing where no one stood. Historians argued. One school dismissed Eliza Boone as myth, a composite of fears projected onto an already brutal system. Another acknowledged the records but insisted on coincidence. Genetics, they said. Environmental factors. Poor data. A few quieter voices asked different questions. Why had so many records vanished? Why had so many physicians refused to publish? Why did the pattern stop so suddenly after Boone Plantation burned? Those voices were ignored. In 1894, a traveling nurse wrote a letter to her sister describing a patient she had assisted near the Ogeechee River. Her hair was white as milk, though her skin was dark as earth. She did not look old. She did not look young. She asked me what year it was and smiled when I told her. The letter was never answered. It was found years later among unrelated papers, dismissed as an embellishment. Whether Eliza Boone lived long enough to see the world change is something no record can prove. Whether she died in the swamp that first night, or walked out of it into a life deliberately untraceable, remains unknown. But one thing endured beyond rumor and denial. Wherever cruelty masqueraded as science, wherever bodies were treated as tools, stories of a white-haired woman followed soon after. Stories that made men hesitate before reaching out to take what they believed was theirs. And hesitation, in a world built on violence, was no small legacy to leave behind. By the time the 20th century arrived, Boone Plantation existed only as a footnote, when it was mentioned at all. The land had been swallowed by marsh and scrub, the last visible remnants of brick and foundation stone sinking slowly into the wet earth. Surveyors avoided it. Locals crossed themselves when passing nearby. Children were warned not to wander there, not because of ghosts, but because something about the place was wrong. History preferred cleaner stories. Scholars spoke of economic collapse, of fire, of unrest common to the era. They spoke of disease patterns and environmental toxins, of isolated anomalies that meant nothing when separated from their context. They spoke carefully, safely. What they did not speak of was intent. What they did not speak of was a young enslaved woman whose body had been used as a testing ground long before she ever learned to read, whose mother had been dismantled in the name of progress, whose pain had been measured, recorded, and dismissed. Modern geneticists would later argue that Eliza Boone's white hair could be explained. Somatic mutation, rare pigmentation disorder, environmental stressors during pregnancy. They could explain the hair. They could not explain the pattern of illness that followed her touch. They could not explain the dogs that refused her trail. They could not explain the records that vanished in clusters, or the doctors who went silent all at once. And they could not explain why, in regions tied to Boone Plantation survivors, certain men began to fear their own cruelty, as if some deep, inherited memory had learned to flinch. Cruelty had always relied on certainty. Certainty that bodies could be owned. Certainty that suffering could be contained. Certainty that experiments ended when the subject died. Eliza Boone shattered that certainty. Whether she lived another year or another 50, whether she died nameless in the swamp or walked north under a different name, history never caught her again. And perhaps that was the point. Some stories are not meant to be archived. Some truths survive only because they refuse to be pinned down, labeled, and neutralized. They move instead, through rumor, through warning, through fear that feels inconvenient and irrational, through hesitation. The journal is gone. The witnesses are gone. The plantation is gone. But the question remains. What if Eliza Boone was not an anomaly, but an outcome? What if the real horror was not what she became, but what was done to make her? And what if the reason science had no explanation was because it never wanted to examine the cruelty at the center of the experiment? These stories do not end cleanly. They are buried on purpose. And they stay buried only as long as no one listens. So now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Eliza Boone survived the fire? Or did her legend grow because people needed to believe justice had escaped the swamp? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more dark historical mysteries like this, stories that blur the line between documented history and the horrors it tried to erase, subscribe to Chronicles of Shadows. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who believes the past is never truly past. These stories were buried for a reason. These voices were silenced on purpose. And remembering them is its own form of resistance.